The following content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by Inner City Press. No edits, no filters, just the raw truth, straight from inside the courtroom. Chapter 1. I never thought my heart would betray my gut. Posted by you, Jane Unfiltered. Flair. Real talk, legal confessions. I never imagined I'd sit in a courtroom, surrounded by attorneys, reporters, and sketch artists, talking about the man I once thought I loved. And not just any man. Sean Diddy Combs. The mogul, the empire builder, the man who made the world dance. And the man who, behind closed doors, made me feel smaller than I've ever felt in my life. I met Diddy in 2020 at an event I had no business attending. A friend pulled me into that world. Music executives, luxury brands, the gloss of celebrity. He noticed me across the room. I was flattered, flustered, unsure. But he was charming, warm, inviting. When he said I had a presence, I believed him. He made you believe anything he said. At first, it was exciting. Diddy had a way of drawing people in, not with aggression, but with assurance. The dinners, the phone calls, the quiet conversations about dreams and struggle. It felt real. He talked about his past, his hustle, how much loyalty meant to him. It felt like I'd stumbled into a rare connection. I wanted to matter in his world. And for a while, I did. He introduced me to his team as someone he trusted. He let me inside his circle, took me on trips, gifted me clothes I'd never afford. I was invited to private parties, not just a +1, but someone whose presence was expected. And slowly, expectations followed. There were conversations that weren't demands, not exactly, but I felt the pressure to say yes to whatever made him happy. I remember one night in Miami. He told me, "I don't need drama, I need peace. If you bring peace, I'll bring the world to you." And that sounded beautiful. Until I realized peace meant silence. Peace meant compliance. Peace meant smiling through things I wasn't comfortable with, showing up dressed a certain way, entertaining certain guests, participating in situations that blurred emotional and physical boundaries. I never said the word no, but I also never really had the space to say it. People ask why I stayed. The truth is, I didn't think I was in danger. Diddy never raised his hand to me. He didn't need to. The danger wasn't in violence, it was in invisibility. It was in being erased when I stopped playing my role. I began seeing signs of that erasure early on. He'd suddenly go cold for days if I questioned anything. He'd post other women online while telling me I was the one he protected in private. He called me his quiet queen. I started questioning my own reactions. Was I being too sensitive? Too needy? But the part that hurt most wasn't even about me. It was the way he spoke about women in general, like they were pieces in his grand game, replaceable, reprogrammable. "Every queen has her time," he once said, sipping tequila at 2 a.m. "Some just don't know when to bow out gracefully." The emotional whiplash became constant. He could be tender, brilliant even, and then completely indifferent. He'd call at midnight asking me to fly out and then not speak to me for 48 hours. And yet I kept showing up. Why? Because when he did acknowledge me, it felt like sunlight. And when he didn't, I told myself storms pass. In the courtroom today, they asked me if I was in love with him. I said yes. I didn't flinch, because I was. And that's what makes it all harder to explain. How do you tell the world you were mistreated by someone you adored? How do you confess that your heart stayed long after your gut knew it was time to go? They showed the jury recordings. Messages from him. "Get on your job," he said in one. "Don't disappoint me tonight." It sounds mild now, but in the moment it felt like a command. It felt like if I didn't show up right, dressed right, behaving right, I'd be iced out again. And I couldn't take that silence. I was addicted to the approval. I don't write this for pity. I write this because somewhere out there someone is being told, if you don't give me what I want, I'll give my spotlight to someone else. And they might think that spotlight is love. It isn't. It's control with a prettier filter. Diddy's legacy may be one of music and ambition, but my story, the one I've hidden behind designer dresses and private jets, isn't glamorous. It's a slow unraveling. It's a girl who thought she could handle the fire and didn't realize she was already burning. And now, I testify. Not because I hate him, but because the truth matters more than my reputation, more than his. Because silence may have kept me safe for a while, but it also kept me small. Chapter 2. When silence feels like safety, until it doesn't. Posted by /Jane Unfiltered. Flair legal confession, emotional trauma. I remember the first time I thought I might be in too deep. It wasn't during some dramatic confrontation or a shouting match. Diddy never needed to raise his voice to make you feel like you disappointed him. It was a quiet Tuesday in New York. We were supposed to meet for dinner. I waited 3 hours. When I finally messaged him, he replied, "Something more important came up. Stay beautiful." No apology, no explanation, just that. That's how things went. Unpredictable. If I questioned it, I was being emotional. If I stayed quiet, I was mature. So I learned silence. I learned that being agreeable earned me kindness, and questioning things made me disappear. That kind of training doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow conditioning. I'd get lavish gifts the day after being completely ignored, a bracelet, a pair of shoes. Once, a note that said, "I see you, don't doubt it." But I didn't feel seen. I felt erased and replaced, then suddenly remembered like a toy pulled back from storage. Diddy had a way of making you feel like you were the only one, even when you knew, deep down, you weren't. He curated affection. He performed intimacy like an artist, and I was the audience craving an encore. It's embarrassing to admit how much I lived for his praise. A single "you handled that well" could carry me through a week of anxiety and self-doubt. He never made threats. He didn't need to. The world around him functioned like a machine. His people protected him, worshipped him, followed instructions with military precision. They called him Puff, Love, Boss. I was never sure which version I was waking up to. But no matter which one he wore that day, they all held power over me. I was eventually introduced to what he called special nights. Dinners that led to expectations. He'd tell me, "You'll look amazing tonight, just be present." I was always present. I showed up in the clothes he had sent, wore the makeup his assistant picked, smiled when I felt nauseous. I didn't speak unless spoken to. People in that room had no idea what I was going through. From the outside, I was living a dream. Private jets, front row seats, designer everything. But dreams don't usually come with NDAs and secret schedules. There was one night I'll never forget. A hotel in Los Angeles. I was sick, genuinely ill, but I still went. I didn't think I had a choice. He looked at me and said, "Don't ruin the mood." I nodded, heart pounding. The pressure to deliver, not for him, but for whatever arrangement had been quietly agreed upon, was overwhelming. Afterwards, I sat in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes didn't look like mine. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, and yet I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. If I cried, I might admit to myself that I didn't know how to leave. In court, they asked if I was ever forced. That word, forced, is so sharp. I didn't have bruises. I didn't have a recording. But I had silence. I had the fear that if I ever said no, I'd vanish. Not physically, but socially, financially, emotionally. My presence in his world was conditional, and I knew exactly what those conditions were. They showed one of his voice messages to the jury. "Don't embarrass me tonight." That was it. 7 words. But to me, it was a demand, a reminder, a warning, the kind of thing you hear in your head long after the message ends. Some people said I was grown, that I made my choices, that I liked the lifestyle too much to walk away. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was seduced by the world he built, but I also know what it feels like to be shaped by someone else's expectations until you don't recognize yourself anymore. I was never chained, never locked up, but I wasn't free either. My freedom came with caveats. Smile here, wear this, don't ask that. It was like walking a tightrope in heels you never chose, just to stay in his gaze a little longer. I didn't speak out to destroy him. That's what people don't understand. This isn't revenge. This is truth. I'm trying to reclaim a version of myself that existed before his voice rewrote my instincts. I tell my story not to expose, but to illuminate, to remind people that silence doesn't equal consent, and that power, real power, isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, and those whispers stay with you far longer than you think. Chapter 3. The invisible contracts I never signed. They always ask, did he ever make you do something against your will? That's the wrong question. It's not about being pinned to a wall or shouted into submission. It's about the invisible contracts you never sign but are expected to follow. The unspoken rules you learn quickly or you're out. And in Diddy's world, being out meant more than being removed from a party. It meant being exiled from an entire ecosystem of influence, access, and identity. The most dangerous part wasn't when he raised his voice. He rarely did. It was when he went silent. When he sent a 3-word text like, "You disappoint me," or just stopped acknowledging me entirely. I learned how to avoid that silence the way someone learns to dodge a slap. And that's the game no one sees. The punishment that looks like distance. The reward that feels like attention. Diddy wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He was composed. He smiled in public, hugged his fans, thanked his team. But behind closed doors, his expectations were clear. You were either elevating his empire or dragging it down. And dragging it down could mean something as simple as refusing to play along. There was a night in Paris, Fashion Week. He wanted me to attend a private gathering with him and some partners. When I hesitated, he tilted his head and said, "Don't start being unpredictable." That was the closest he ever came to threatening me. I went, of course. I wore what his stylist laid out and acted like I belonged there, but inside I was splitting in two. I remember standing in the hotel hallway afterwards, just breathing. I didn't want to go back in. I wasn't afraid he'd hurt me physically. I was afraid he'd stop believing in me. That's how twisted it got. I wasn't scared of pain, I was scared of being discarded. And so I stayed. Stayed through the high-stakes parties, the exclusive meetups that turned into deeply uncomfortable situations, the late-night requests that weren't requests. Every time I tried to pull away, he pulled me back in with something beautiful. A song, he said, reminded him of me. A custom necklace, a moment of warmth. It wasn't fake, that's what made it worse. Sometimes it was genuine, but that kindness was always conditional. The night I finally told someone, really told someone, was the first time I used the word conditioned. My therapist wrote it down. You weren't just manipulated, you were conditioned. She wasn't wrong. By then, my health had started to reflect what I was suppressing. I lost weight. I developed insomnia. I cried without knowing why. One day I fainted on a photo shoot set. When I saw the doctor, she asked me what had changed. I couldn't say it out loud. My body is shutting down because I keep participating in physical encounters I never wanted, but couldn't refuse without consequence. How do you explain that? You don't. You just carry it. The hardest part about this story is the people who knew pieces of it and looked the other way. Assistants, producers, stylists, they knew when something wasn't right. They saw how I flinched when his mood shifted, how I always asked for permission before speaking. They saw it, and they normalized it. Because when someone is as powerful as Diddy, you adapt. Or you disappear. It took me months to realize I wasn't alone. There were whispers, former friends who cut ties, other women who vanished from his circle without a trace. When I started connecting dots, I felt sick. I wasn't the only one. I might not even have been the first, but I could be one of the few who spoke out. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm on that stand. Not because I want revenge, but because I refuse to let silence write the last chapter of this story. I gave Diddy my trust, my loyalty, my silence. Now I give the truth. Chapter 4. The Gift That Took Something Away. Posted by you/Jane Unfiltered. Flair. Reflection. Survivor's Memoir. It was a necklace. Rose gold. Custom engraved. Love. That was his name for himself during that era. Love. And the moment I opened the velvet box, everyone in the room gasped. "You must mean something to him," someone whispered. I smiled, nodded, said thank you. Common campy. But in my chest, I felt nothing. No joy, no pride. Just a pressure. As if the gift had a tag I couldn't see, one that read, "Don't say no tonight." That was the pattern with Diddy. His generosity was legendary, but it wasn't free. It came with expectations. I was never outright told what to do. I didn't have to be. The atmosphere made it clear. You accepted the gift, you fulfilled the role. People love to say, "You could have left," and I get it. From the outside, everything looks voluntary. But when your sense of safety, belonging, and even survival is linked to staying, it's not a choice, it's an arrangement. One I never agreed to. There was a rooftop party in Miami, just one of many, but it sticks in my memory. Diddy had just signed a new deal and wanted to celebrate. There were celebrities, artists, athletes, and me standing near the edge in a dress I didn't pick, holding a drink I didn't order. He whispered, "Tonight is about making them feel like kings." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew, and I did it, because not doing it meant watching everything I'd built crumble. My own identity began to blur. I didn't know where he ended and I began. I looked in the mirror and saw someone polished, styled, smiling. But she wasn't me. She was a reflection of what Diddy wanted people to see, a curated image, a walking endorsement, never tired, never angry, never saying no. There were nights I'd lie in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep. His voice echoed in my head, "You're one of the few I can trust." That line haunted me, because I wasn't sure it was trust. It felt more like control. Like he'd pick me because he knew I wouldn't cause trouble, because I'd learned to smile through everything. Court was worse than I imagined. They played audio messages, his voice, casual but calculated. "Stay sharp, don't mess this up." Messages that sound harmless unless you know the context, unless you've lived in the space between his praise and his punishment. One juror looked at me like they couldn't understand how someone like me, dressed well, articulate, seemingly put together, could say I was victimized. That's the hardest part. People expect pain to look messy, to come with scars and screaming, but pain like a real head. Sometimes it looks like a necklace you can't take off. When I said his name on the stand, Diddy, I didn't do it with hate. I did it with clarity, because no one else had said it. Everyone had danced around it. A powerful figure, an entertainment mogul. But I needed to say it plainly, because it was him, and it mattered. I'm not trying to cancel him. I'm trying to survive him. You can't heal from something while pretending it didn't happen. And for years, I pretended. Now, I want my voice back. I want to say his name and not tremble. I want to wear what I choose, speak when I want. Love who I want without thinking, what would he say? He once told me, "You'll never find someone like me." I used to believe that, but now I know that's a good thing. Chapter 5. When Silence Becomes a Sentence, posted by you. Jane Unfiltered. Flair. Courtroom/confession. I remember the courtroom silence. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like a storm that's been paused. Everyone waiting, watching, measuring your voice, your tears, your posture. I was wearing gray, not because it flattered me, but because I didn't want to stand out. Because when you're about to say something that powerful about someone that powerful, you don't want your clothes to speak louder than your truth. I said it again. Diddy. And this time, I didn't whisper it. The judge looked at me like he was trying to gauge how deep the damage went. The defense lawyer smirked, as if to say, "Really? That's what you're going with?" And across the room, Diddy sat with the calm of someone who had sat in hundreds of boardrooms, diffused thousands of controversies, and built an empire on controlling the narrative. But he couldn't control this one, not anymore. Because I had lived it, and now I was reliving it. Every night, every request, every moment I folded into something smaller just to survive in his orbit. He never raised his hand to me. That's what his legal team kept saying. No evidence of violence. But what about the nights he made it clear I wasn't allowed to leave until he was done discussing business? What about the meetings that turned into encounters I didn't initiate? What about the time he got angry, not shouting, just cold, and told me, "This is what loyalty looks like," or "You can go"? He loved saying that. "You can go." As if walking away wasn't a psychological cliff. As if leaving someone who controls your access to work, to rooms you fought to be in, to the image of who you are, that was as easy as taking a cab. So I stayed. Until my body couldn't anymore. Until the therapist's office became the only place I spoke freely. Until the day I stopped crying and started writing everything down. Until the moment I met another woman. Quiet, strong, broken in familiar places, and she said, "You too?" And suddenly I wasn't alone. Suddenly I was part of something. This wasn't about a bad relationship. This was about a system, a culture. A man who built his brand on being untouchable and taught everyone around him to look away. The trial was surreal. They asked me about text messages, photos, why I kept working with him, why I didn't run. And I answered again and again with the kind of patience you only develop after years of explaining your pain to people who think trauma has a timeline. I told them the truth. He didn't trap me in a room. He trapped me in admiration, in promises, in public praise that disguised private harm. You don't run from someone who's supposed to be your mentor, your lifeline, your gateway to everything you've ever dreamed of. You endure. Until one day, you don't. There was a point during my testimony when I almost stopped. Not because I was afraid, but because I saw his face. Not angry, not ashamed, just unmoved. Like none of this was news to him. Like he'd already prepared himself to deny it all. That's when I realized he had practiced this moment too. He wasn't surprised by my story. He was just surprised that I told it. So I kept going, because maybe someone else was listening. Someone sitting at home, wondering if their experience counts, if their story would ever be believed. I wanted them to know you don't need bruises to be broken. You don't need permission to speak. Silence can be a sentence too, and I'm not serving it anymore. Chapter 6. The last contract I ever signed. Posted by you, Jane Unfiltered, Flair, Closure, Survival. It's over now. Not the pain, not the memories, but the part where I feel like I owe anyone silence. That ended the moment I left the courtroom, stepped into daylight, and didn't look back. The press was waiting, microphones angled, cameras flashing. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't perform. Because I wasn't there to entertain. I was there to tell the truth. It took me months, years really, to realize what he had done wasn't just wrong, it was orchestrated, polished, hidden behind luxury and applause. Diddy wasn't just a man with power, he was a brand. And when you become a brand, your sins come wrapped in PR campaigns, charities, and photo ops. But truth has no stylist. And when it finally arrives, it's raw, clumsy, and unstoppable. The last thing he ever said to me directly was in a voicemail. "You're acting emotional. Don't forget what I've done for you." I didn't reply because I finally understood he didn't give. He traded. Every gift was leverage. Every compliment a future withdrawal. The necklace? A reminder. The trip to Paris? A test. The contract I signed under dim lighting with lawyers I didn't choose. A trap, disguised as opportunity. I said no in front of a jury. I said no on the record. I said no without crying, without apologizing, without sugarcoating the legacy of a man people worshipped. Because power isn't a shield, it's a mirror. And if you don't hold it up to someone like Diddy, he never has to look at himself. The days after the trial were quiet. No calls, no emails, just silence. And for once it wasn't punishment, it was peace. I went back to that same cafe where I used to meet his team. Ordered the same drink I used to sip while pretending to be okay. But this time, I sat alone. I paid the bill. I walked out without needing to explain myself to anyone. I wasn't ashamed anymore. I used to think closure meant apology, that one day he'd admit it all, say he was sorry. But now I know, closure is something you sign for yourself. Not in court, not in public, but in private, when you finally believe your own story without needing it to be believed by everyone else. So this is the last thing I'll write. Not because I'm done feeling, but because I'm done proving. My name isn't on buildings or record labels. I don't own vodka brands or TV networks. But I have something he doesn't. A truth that doesn't need a remix. And that, to me, is enough.